Hello and welcome to another episode of Scroll Ideas, a show from Scroll where we take down an idea that Indians are debating and discussing, and we break it down with a particularly brainy guest. As observant viewers might have realized, Scroll Ideas was on a bit of a break, but we're back now, and hopefully we'll be a lot more regular going forward. This week, we're going to discuss a particularly thorny issue that's generated a lot of debate, that's generated a lot of discussion. It's been quite heated. The question here is, should Muslim and Christian Dalits get the benefit of the scheduled caste status? So that would mean getting reservations under the SC quota, that would mean getting protection under laws such as the SC/ST Atrocities Act, and so on and so forth. Currently, the legal status of scheduled caste status is only given to Dalits from the Hindu, Buddhist, and Sikh backgrounds. It is not extended to Muslims and Christians. And to discuss that, we have with us a fantastic guest, which is Khalid Anis Ansari. Khalid is a sociologist and also a public intellectual whose work has dealt deeply with the idea of caste amongst Indian Muslims. And we've after a long courtship, Khalid has at last agreed to come on to Scroll Ideas, and he's going to break down a number of very important topics that honestly Indians don't discuss as much as they should, and hopefully we'll make a small dent in that over the next hour with Khalid. Hi, Khalid. How are you doing?
Hi. Thank you for having me uh,
Right.
in this discussion. Yeah.
Very pleased to have you, Khalid. I think Khalid is one of the people that I would read a piece once just seeing the byline. If one day Khalid decides to write on Shah Rukh Khan, also I'll sit and read it. But till now he has not. But so he's one of those people who's I'll automatically read a piece, and I'm so glad that he's managed to come on, so our viewers can also pick his brain. I'm going to jump right into the discussion, Khalid. One of the obviously since your work deals with it in detail, one of the things that I think many of your viewers might even be confounded by is the idea of caste in Islam, and especially in amongst Indian Muslims. So this is something that your work has dealt with deeply. And before we go to the idea of reservations and enter that debate, I want you to break down how caste works amongst Muslims in India, and then we'll go on to the other communities. But since this is your research, how does it work? How different is it from caste in Hindu society, or is it not different at all? How does it work? And if you could just give us a few examples of how it would work in the day-to-day life of an Indian Muslim.
Yeah. So, if you map the Indian Muslim society, then there are caste-based, status-based hierarchies. So, and the category Pasmanda, which has been for quite a while, it basically includes the backward Muslims who were converted from erstwhile Shudra caste. They're largely peasants, artisan communities, agricultural labor, and so on and so forth. So that is the first category. The second category is that of Adivasi Muslims. So those Muslims who converted from the Adivasi locations. And the third is that of the Dalit Muslims. So Dalit Muslims, they converted from the erstwhile untouchable caste or from the Dalit origins. Now, these three categories, the backward Muslims, the Adivasi Muslims, and the Dalit Muslims, they are broadly encompassed by the category Pasmanda. They constitute about 85% of the Indian Muslim population. And also they're internally, they are also a differentiated community with around 700 Jati or Biradari subgroups. So that is the broad map. Now, hierarchy works even within Muslims, and most of the Muslims don't live in something called Islam or Quran. They live in South Asian society. And that is what one of our arguments has been, that caste and untouchability both, they are a pan religion social evil in South Asia. So they are a practice. Uh, so now, what this empirical reality of caste and their daily discrimination, for even in Muslims also, and even in the wider civil society, many of these groups, and mostly the Adivasis and Dalits would be the weakest among the Pasmanda category. So they bear the brunt of untouchability, they bear the brunt of caste hierarchies, discrimination at a quotidian, at a daily level, at the level of
Mm.
social interactions, and so on and so forth. So that is there. So one of the arguments, uh, and if you look conceptually, why has caste been disinvented or invisibilized in conversations? So one may go back historically to the Orientalist colonial knowledge systems, which made a very interesting move. So they religionized caste and made it an internal element of the Hindu faith, Hindu religion. So at one level, they religionized caste, re-articulated as a Hindu practice, and in this move, the ideological factors were privileged at the expense of the political economy, right? So, and you have stalwarts like Max Weber and his intellectual progeny like Louis Dumont uh, that basically argue that caste is a Hindu phenomena and so on and so forth. But what is often missed is that there is, right from the onset, uh, there has been an heterodox tradition within social sciences, within anthropology, that has challenged this formulation of Hinduization of caste or
Mm.
religionization of caste. And one could uh, briefly mention a few names: A.M. Hokart, Morton Class, J.L. Brockington, Declan Quigley, Sumit Guha, Hira Singh, and so on and so forth. So
Right.
this is, I mean, a number of heterodox anthropologists which have challenged and relocated caste in political economy. For example, Brockington, he argues for the decoupling of caste and Hinduism. And I'm quoting from Brockington. He says, the caste system, though closely integrated with the Hindu religion, is not essential to it, right? Uh, and it's also the way we approach religion. So religion cannot be approached in its abstraction. Any theology or religious life, it is dynamic, and it works closely in relationship with political economy, with the state, and the wider power relations. So to attribute any essence to any faith, whether to see Hinduism as essentially as an inegalitarian tradition, or to see Islam and Christianity, Sikhism or Buddhism as essentially egalitarian traditions. So that runs against sociological evidence, and it's a
Mm.
very weak premise to formulate public policy. And even if you look at Hinduism as a faith tradition, then one must make a distinction between the high spiritual principles of Hinduism and its concrete codification, legality, its rituals, which carry the imprint of class and social stratification, which is not a feature exceptional to South Asia, but it is a feature which is prevalent in all post-surplus societies. So any post-surplus society has social stratification, it has class cleavages, and those cleavages and social stratification, they find their entry into theology, into religion as well. And Hinduism is no exception. If you read early Islam, if you read the Islamic jurisprudence, you'll find the
Mm.
traces of those kinds of stratification and class cleavages there as well. Even in Christian tradition, if you go for law in the feudal Europe, you'll find class stratification. So this
Right.
notion that South Asia is exceptional or Hinduism is exceptional, this is something that needs to be challenged, because there are egalitarian principles within Hinduism as well. And Dr. Ambedkar, in the riddle number 22, he talks about Brahmaism as opposed to Brahmanism, right? So he says
Right.
Brahmaism is the cosmic principle that pervades all reality. And since reality is there, so it is also a principle which equalizes human beings, and therefore it's a very very strong principle that the Hindus could have used to create a democratic order, to create fraternity, and so on and so forth. So again, so this distinction between the high spiritual principles of a faith and its contextual translation in the form of law, in the form of smritis, or in the form of faith, one needs to make a distinction. So, on that count, I mean, that is one of my core arguments, that caste must be delinked from religion. It must be seen as a social practice, a South Asian social practice, which applies to all regions and to all communities, all faith traditions. So, yeah.
In fact, one of the things that I like to add, Khalid, is there's been, a spate of new research around historical genetics in India, and this is something that I find fascinating. And within the South Asian context, I think one of the core features of caste is, endogamy. So you're marrying it within very small groups, which obviously are the jatis in India. So, and I think that if you do, if you look at endogamy in Pakistan, which is practically a 95 plus percent Muslim society, and you look at endogamy in North India, there's almost no difference, right? There is extreme, highly strong endogamous patterns which have existed from before the coming of Islam, and they've sort of maintained, they've been static through see these huge changes that have gone through society. Islam came, Islam, the Mughal rule stopped, British came, but this endogamy did not go, right?
Yeah.
So even within Pakistan, I think the concept of intermarriage in caste is an unthinkable concept. In fact, recently I was looking at a joke when there was this really desperate, the way you have these jokes about desi men. This man was posting a marriage proposal on a random internet forum, some Pakistani man. In that also, though, he wrote, "Please, Aryans excuse." So Aryans are sort of a agricultural caste of Pakistan. So in that also, in that joke, in that funny context, he wanted to make it clear that, please, Aryan girls should not apply for this proposal. So it's an extremely embedded concept. Uh, I mean, you can see this very clearly in Pakistan, which was a part of India right till 7 decades back. One
Yeah.
thing,
Also, to add, just to add
yeah,
an illustration, since you raised
right.
the issue of question of Pakistan. So in 2021, just a couple of years back, so in the Sindh area, there was this graveyard and the grave of GM Sayyid, who was a very illustrious Sindhi national leader. And around the grave of this Sayyid leader, there were 13 graves of Muslims from Malla community, it's lower caste Malla community. And these graves, they were dug out, they were desecrated, and relocated to another part of the graveyard because of the proximity to the Sayyid leader. So, I mean, so if you look at, I mean, how do you explain that? You can't just explain that Muslims have learned this from the Hindus.
Hmm.
After 70 years of existence of Pakistan, uh, the persistence of caste in South Asia. So it needs
Hmm.
a different explanatory grid than this religionization and caste being seen as a residual in Muslim and Christian and other societies. So I think one has to rethink on that, because the daily experience of Muslim manual scavengers, washermen, the dhobis, the lal begis, the halal khors, the Muslim bhangis, uh, and the Muslim gorkans who dig graves,
Hmm.
cobblers, agricultural labor. So, I mean, they face discrimination both within the Muslim society and the wider civil society because of their caste, and they are stigmatized. So, in that sense, we need a different sociological interpretation of the persistence of caste even in non-Hindu communities.
Got it. Now let's go down to the nuts and bolts of this debate, whether Muslims and Christians who are Dalits should legally be awarded scheduled caste status. So before we get into this debate, I want you to walk our viewers through some of the history of this, Khalid. You know, uh, Reservations for Dalits have existed since colonial times. In fact, that is when they first start. Why are Muslims and Christians left out of that framework? I also want you to try and just touch on the fact that the Pune Pact that Gandhi and Ambedkar signed was not had nothing to do with Muslims and Christians. In fact, nothing to do with Sikhs and Buddhists at that time. Also, it was a purely sort of Hindu pact. So, how did these conditions come up where such a large number of Indians at that time were getting left out of these caste-based politics that was happening pre-colonial, which sort of obviously got extended even post 47?
Yeah, so this is a very important question that you raised, Shoaib, and there is a lot of misinformation and confusion around that. So the story and most of the writings that I've run through in the last few months, they start from the Pune Pact, right? But one needs to go a bit back in history. So in 1909, so the Molly Minto reforms, it granted a separate representation, separate electorate to Muslims, right?
Right.
Uh, and in 1919, in Montagu Chelmsford reforms, the Sikhs and the Indian Christians, they also got the political safeguards. They also got representation in the provincial assemblies and so on.
Hmm.
In 1932, which is the MacDonald Communal Award, so it for the first time includes the depressed classes uh, as a separate electorate, and that is where the controversy starts between Mahatma Gandhi and Baba Sahib
Which,
Ambedkar.
just for our viewers, is a colonial term for what are scheduled caste, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that is where the controversy starts. So the 1936 constitutional SC order,
Hmm.
it is directly related to the question of political representation, to the question of political safeguards. It has nothing to do with employment or educational reservations. So the 1936 order, the
So it's
constitutional
only got
SC,
legislative reservation, basically.
yeah, so it is directly related to the question of legislative reservations, political
Right.
safeguards.
Right.
So since the Muslims, the Christians, and the Sikhs, they were already getting political safeguards, right? So the question of their political safeguards did not arise, right? Now the controversy between Mahatma Gandhi and Baba Sahib Ambedkar. Uh, so obviously, we all know from those debates around the Pune Pact that
Hmm.
Mahatma Gandhi was against this idea of excluding the depressed classes or the present scheduled caste, the Dalits, from the Hindu community, from the Hindu category. And then a compromise was arrived at after a long debate and all kinds of political uh, overtures and all kinds of protests and so on. But a compromise was struck between Baba Sahib and Mahatma Gandhi. And the idea was that separate electorate will not be accepted, but there would be reserved seats in the legislative bodies, and the number of seats was increased. It was made almost twice than the earlier in the separate
Right.
electorate, whatever was accorded, right? So that is
So
the
just for our
background.
viewers, I just want to so when Khalid is talking about separate electors, I think what he means, what he's saying is at that time, a Muslim would have only voted for a Muslim candidate and a Christian for a Christian candidate, and a Hindu for a Hindu. That was a pre 47. In fact, it even continued for a bit after 47, but it was abolished when the constitution was put out. Sorry, Khalid, I just wanted to make
No,
sure all our viewers
that's
were on board.
yeah, yeah. So, so now, so after the Pune Pact, so Muslims, Christians, and Sikhs, they were getting political safeguards even earlier. After the Pune Pact, the Dalits or the scheduled caste, they got the political safeguards in the form of reserved seats, not in the form of
Right.
separate electorates, right? And the 36 scheduled caste, the Constitution Scheduled Caste Order 1936, which derives from the Government of India Act of 1935, it basically creates a list for legislative purposes only, right?
Right.
And in that list, the Christians were clearly excluded in that list of scheduled castes or depressed classes, scheduled castes. The Christians were excluded, and Buddhists from Bengal region and some tribes from the Bengal region, they were also excluded, right? And incidentally, there is the
Mhm.
presence of castes like Lal Begis, Halal Khors, which could be Muslim also, but there is no mention of Islam or any other faith, Islam, Sikhism, or any other faith there. Uh, but to be fair, one could see that Muslims, Christians, and uh, the Sikhs, they were already getting political safeguards earlier. So this 36 order is largely for the scheduled caste, right? And Christians and Buddhists are clearly uh, clearly uh, rejected there in that list. Now, now there is the debate which happens within the Constituent Assembly, right? And there is one important fact that we need to keep in mind, uh, which is that the Constituent Assembly was elected indirectly based on the results of the 1935-1936 provincial assembly elections. And those elections did not have a universal adult franchise. There was a restricted electorate at that point of time, and very few people could vote. There were income, property, and educational qualifications in the electorate.
I think it was
And
around
in
10%. 10% of the adult
no,
population could vote.
Austin suggests. I mean, so the estimate of Austin's is around 28%.
28.
But he also mentions that it varies from region to region. And
Right.
some estimates, for example, in Bihar and UP, they suggest that out of Muslims, only around 13 to 14% Muslims were allowed to vote, right?
Right.
And these 13-14% Muslims who were allowed to vote were largely from the privileged caste because of the correlation between caste and class,
Class.
right? Caste and
Right.
economics. So, so again, that is what one needs to keep in mind, that most of the members, the Muslim and Christian and Sikh and other members in the Constituent Assembly, they largely came from privileged backgrounds, right? So now, when the deliberations start happening in the Constituent Assembly, there are two phases. So there is a minority subcommittee which is formed
Hmm.
to discuss these matters, to discuss the matters of political safeguards, discuss the matters of minority, and so on and so forth. So there are two phases: one before partition, and the second after partition. So if you look at the Constituent Assembly deliberations before partition, separate electorate is gone. So everyone rejects the idea of separate electorates. But there is a consensus before the partition deliberations that Muslims,
Hmm.
Christians, and Sikhs and other communities, while separate electorate is divisive, but they would have reserved seats in the legislative assemblies, right? So that was phase one. Uh, so again, everyone comes at par. So whether they are religious communities like Sikhs, Muslims, and Christians, they would have reserved seats, and also the scheduled castes will have reserved seats according to the 1936 order, right? Uh, what happens after partition? The second phase of Constituent Assembly deliberations is that even the question of political safeguards is gone for Sikhs, for Muslims, and for Christians. And that is where there's a discussion which happens where the Sikh leader, Hukum Singh, he says if political safeguards are gone for Sikhs, then at least ensure that four castes, which are the Ramdasi, Kabir Panthi, Mazhabi, and Sikh leader. So these four are lower caste Sikhs from the state of Punjab. At least ensure that these are included, right?
Right.
Sikh leader Hukum Singh, he argued in favor of inclusion when thus political safeguards are gone for the entire
Hmm.
Sikh community, right? So again, there is a back and forth there. When the Sikh leader Hukum Singh raises this demand, there is a stern opposition from the SC representative, from the Dalit representatives. But eventually, because of partition and because of a particular context, his demand is accepted, right? So in
Right.
the Constituent Assembly, Sardar Patel and other Constituent Minority Committee members, uh, they agree that we will include these four Sikh castes from the state of Punjab. Uh, while the minority representatives from the Christian and from the Muslim communities, they didn't raise any demand. So their concern was only cultural safeguards and not political safeguards. And again, there is a psychological
So
context to
does
that.
this have to do with the fact that you only had Ashraf Muslims in the Constituent Assembly?
Yeah, not only Ashraf
Right.
Muslims, also privileged upper caste Christians.
Right.
So, so both of these communities,
Right. So they
and
didn't
they
even raise the
represented.
fact of Pasmanda Muslim reservations or
No,
backward
no,
caste
no, no,
because it
no.
didn't
They
even
did
affect
not.
them personally at all.
Yeah,
They would
yeah.
not have gained anything
So
even if they had got it, basically.
yeah, yeah. So
Right.
it was not their concern, and
Of course.
understandably so, it was not their concern. Uh, and also because of the guilt of partition, because of partition violence in the background, also this connection of the Christian tradition with the European colonial, British colonial thing. Probably there was some guilt, and they could not raise these issues.
Right.
So one could speculate. One, because of their class locations, they were not concerned. Uh, and if to give them a long rope, even if they were concerned, probably they were not in a position to raise those demands, right? So anyhow, so so for Muslims and Christians, political safeguards were gone. For Sikhs also, political safeguards were gone, but there was a consensus that four castes will be included, right?
Right.
So that is the broad context of the Constituent Assembly debate. So the Pasmanda Muslims, or especially in this particular case, the Dalit Muslims or the Dalit Christians, they did not have any representative in the Constituent Assembly to raise their voices, right? So the settlement which happens, the consensus which happens, is without including their voice.
Hmm.
They did not have any say in those deliberations. So again, there is a feeling among Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims that the settlement in the Constituent Assembly was an unfair settlement because we did not have a representative voice there.
So, like deciding a court case without one party even
Yeah,
being in the courtroom, practically, right?
absolutely, absolutely,
Hmm.
absolutely. So that is what most Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims they feel it was an unfair decision.
Settlement.
Once we come to once the constitution is promulgated
Hmm.
and we have independence, uh, after that there is a 1950 presidential order, the Constitution SC Order 1950, uh, which excludes all non-Hindu Dalits, all non-Hindu communities, except for a proviso of these four Sikh castes,
Right.
which are there because of the particular agreement, particular decision which happened in the Constituent Assembly. Yeah.
Got it.
So, yeah, one can, yeah, if you have any other questions, so when we can proceed.
Right. So basically,
Yeah.
to sum, what you're saying is that I think the pre-colonial history to this, when it is being recruited to deny Muslim and Christian Dalit reservation in 2023, is not very relevant because the conditions were completely different. At that time, Pasmanda and backward caste Christians did not have the sort of voice in the democratic process which would allow them to put their case forward. So just because they weren't powerful enough to do it at that time, to say that they are not eligible to do it now is probably not, accurate. Fair enough. Uh, One of the interesting things that I would like to query you on is, so one of the most popular arguments meant to oppose reservations to Dalit Muslims and Christians is that the religions formally don't have caste, right? So, in a very technical sort of way, I guess there is no. I mean, at least in the way it is there in Hindu scriptures, there is no caste in Islam and Christianity. One thing that I would like to pick your brain on is then this maybe this formal equality also applies to maybe Sikhism and Buddhism. In fact, when Ambedkar converts from Hinduism to Buddhism, he obviously does it because Buddhism is, in his view, an egalitarian religion. So, walk us through how this principle did not apply to Sikhism and Buddhism, but somehow got applied to Islam and Christianity in India. When do Buddhists, for example, you're saying Sikhs were included in the 1950 order. When are Buddhists coming in, and what is the arguments that Buddhists are pushing through into the SC quota?
Okay. So before going to that question, uh, let us go to the basic principles that are cited for exclusion of Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christians, right? So, if you read the affidavit that the government submitted to the Supreme Court last year, Then there are three foundational propositions, three positions. So one, caste and untouchability is a basic feature of Hinduism, right? Second, the Sikhs and Buddhists, they form Sikhism and Buddhism, they form the offshoots or the branches of Hinduism as per explanation uh, 2 of Article 25B, right? So that is the second move in the affidavit. And the third is that since uh, SC category, SC list, it bases itself, it includes those castes uh, which are extremely socially, economically, and educationally backward due to the traditional practice of untouchability. So only those castes could be included. Those form the tripod. That is the conceptual tripod of the government's position.
Mm-hmm.
Now, uh, the first argument from the petitioner side, uh, which I agree with, is that untouchability as a practice, we have already discussed, it is a South Asian practice, right? So that is the empirical anthropological detail. Uh, so the first is that if untouchability as a social practice, it is banned by Article 17 of the
Mm-hmm.
Constitution of India, then how can a social evil and a heinous practice like untouchability, how can it be framed as an essential practice of Hinduism, right? So that is the
Right.
first argument. A social evil, a social practice cannot be an essential practice. It cannot be a protected category, right? So that is the first argument.
Yeah, that's
Now, when
ironic.
we
So
come,
something that is
it is
banned is
ironic.
now being presented as
Yeah,
a essential practice of a
essential
religion.
practice.
Right.
So, and if you look at the long arc of
Hmm.
history, all the Hindu reformers, from Swami Dayanand Saraswati to Swami Vivekanand
Hmm.
to Mahatma Gandhi to Sri Aurobindo, even someone like Veer Savarkar, and recently Mr. Mohan Bhagwat, they have all said that at best, Varna, they have interpreted Varna as
Hmm.
an open system, as not a birth based system, and almost there is a consensus that untouchability is an extraneous practice in Hinduism. It is not legitimized by Hinduism, right? To frame a practice like untouchability as an essential Hindu practice, so that is a problem, right? It cannot
Got
be
it.
constituted as an essential Hindu problem practice. Now, when we come to the question of branches, the branches of Hinduism, that Sikhism and Buddhism, they are branches of Hinduism. Now there is an ambiguity, there is a tension, and let me go through it. So, for example, for matters of personal law, for matters of access to public religious institutions like temples and so on and so forth, the Sikhs and Buddhists, according to explanation 2 of Article 25B, right, they would be constituted as legal Hindus just for two purposes, for purposes of personal law and for purposes of access to religious institutions. They are constituted as legal Hindus according to Article 25, explanation 2 of Article 25B. But does that apply to compensatory discrimination as well? Does that apply to preferential treatment or to listing of SCs? That is a question we need to ask.
Mm-hmm.
So, so after 1950, these four Sikh castes were included, right? But in 1952, there is a High Court case uh, where, just a minute,
Sure.
yeah. So this is Gurmukh Singh versus Union of India, where a Sikh from Bavaria caste, he argues that the SC privileges, SC preferences should be extended to me because the similarly Hindu caste, Hindu Bavaria caste, it is included within the SC list, right?
Right.
So this is 1952. So in 1950, four Sikh castes from Punjab region, they are included. In 1952, a Sikh from Bavaria community
Hmm.
goes to the court asking for inclusion in the SC category on the similar lines of the Hindu Bavaria caste. The High Court gives the judgment against him.
Right.
So that means outside these four castes, which were included because of a certain settlement in the Constituent
Hmm.
Assembly, the High Court gives a judgment against that. And in 1956, on the recommendation of the Kaka Kalelkar Commission, the remaining Sikh castes were included through an amendment in 1956. Right now, we notice in 1936 SC order, the Buddhists were banned. The Buddhists from Bengal, they were banned. In 1950, the Constitution SC Order 1950, the Buddhists are not included. And it's a very important point. The Buddhists are not
Right.
included, and Dr. Ambedkar is the law minister.
Right.
And Dr. Ambedkar did not raise any concern over the non-inclusion of Buddhists. Now, let me take you to 1956,
Mm-hmm.
when the Sikhs are included. In 1956, Dr. Ambedkar embraces Buddhism. And in a very inspiring speech, one day after his conversion to Buddhism, the speech is titled "Why Was Nagpur Chosen?" Dr. Ambedkar says very clearly, and I'll read it out. So, so he acknowledged that his followers would lose SC entitlements due to conversion to Buddhism. So, in that speech in 1956, Dr. Ambedkar clearly acknowledges that his followers, he's aware that his followers will
Hmm.
lose SC status
Hmm.
if he converts to Buddhism. And he says, if we accept Buddhism, even then I will get political rights. My bag of tricks is full of all kinds of things. The one who got those rights in the first place will be able to get them again. Right? So, but Dr. Ambedkar, he passed away soon after 1956,
Hmm.
and the Buddhists had to wait till 1990 to be
Right.
included in the SC list. And in the meantime, many government reports, many government positions, they are against the inclusion of Buddhist, Dalit Buddhists within the SC
Hmm.
category from 1956 to 1950. And there is a case, Punjab Rao versus Meshram, 1965,
Right.
where the Supreme Court rejected the argument that Buddhists were Hindus. Right?
Right.
So this notion uh, that Buddhism and Sikhism, they are branches of Hinduism, uh, was applicable to personal law, to questions of access to institutions. But as far as the listing of SCs were concerned, it is not an open and shut case. And in any case, Buddhists and Sikhs are also separate religions, according to the National Commission of Minorities Act. So, according to the Minorities Act 1992, they are separate religions, right? So, so again, this has to be. So, my point is that this notion of invoking explanation 2 of Article 25B, it's a retrospective justification.
Right.
Dr. Ambedkar did not argue that either in 1950, when the constitution order was passed,
Hmm.
or even in 1956, when he converted, he was very clear that the SC category, that the Dalits Buddhists, they would lose their rights as SCs if he converts to Buddhism, right? And there can be an argument from authority. Someone like Dr. Ambedkar, who is an architect of the Indian Constitution, when he is aware that the Dalit Buddhists, they will lose SC rights, that means it is not as open and shut a case as the government is trying to portray now, right? So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Could you, one thing that I'm curious about, Khalid, so for, almost the first more than 4 decades of independence, Buddhists were not legally classified as scheduled caste. What happened in 1990 that such a big change was done, especially given that after Dr. Ambedkar's conversion, he had converted to Buddhism. So, in spite of that, how did this take so long? And what happened in 1990 that led to this change?
So, you see, I mean, so I already mentioned that between the period from 1950 to 1990, right?
Hmm.
In fact, 1983. So, I'll come to it. So, from 1950 to 1983, the government position usually is averse to the inclusion of Buddhist Dalits in the SC category. In 1993, there is a Gopal Singh Commission report, the Minority Panel report. And in that Gopal Singh report, the report specifically recommended the inclusion of Dalit Sikh, Dalit Buddhist and Dalit Christians in the SC
Right.
category. So the SCs were further, the Dalit Buddhists, they were included on the recommendation of the Gopal Singh panel, the Minority
Interesting.
Report of 1983. But again, interestingly, curiously, while one recommendation of inclusion of Dalit Buddhists is accepted, the other recommendation, that of Dalit Christians, is denied. It's denied.
Interesting. Uh, I want to broaden our discussion, into more of an ideas discussion. This was a great walk through the legal and historical framework of reservations. One of when I come to the realm of ideas, one of the ideas, one of the points that is often put forward by opponents of Dalit Dalit Muslim and Dalit Christian reservations is that after conversion, now Dalit Muslims have a Islamic identity and Dalit Christians have a Christian identity, and that identity overshadows their so-called Dalitness. This is an argument made by some very prominent academics and public intellectuals. So I want you to walk us through the sociology of this, Khalid. How would it work? And do you think this is a fair argument with respect to the SC quota?
So let me come to two more things
Hmm.
from the earlier thread, from the earlier conversation. So, so this notion that Islam and Christianity are egalitarian traditions. So
Hmm.
this applies to Sikhs and Buddhists as well, to Sikhs and Buddhism as a tradition as well. The other notion that Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christians, they are already availing the OBC quota. They are in the OBC
Right.
quota. So, and also they are availing minority rights. Again, this applies to the Sikhs and Buddhists as well, because the
Right.
OBC category is religious neutral, and the Buddhists and Sikhs, they enjoy the minority rights because of the National Commission of Minority Act. They're included as separate religions there, right? So again, there is no, this is not a reasonable classification. If you look at the colonial census reports from 1881 to 1931, if you look at the regional and provincial glossaries and accounts, scholarly works by Ghaus Ansari, Imtiaz Ahmad, Joel Lee, P.K. Trivedi, Srinivas Goli, among several others,
Hmm.
movement narratives from, say, Ali Anwar's Masawat Ki Jang and Dalit Musliman, and the National Commission for Minorities report, which was done by Satish Deshpande. So all this body of knowledge, it clearly establishes untouchability within Muslims and Christians, right? So, so that is one. Now, if you look at the affidavit, so the affidavit suggests that the Rangnath Mishra Commission report is flawed because there is no field study, right? That is
Right.
the one argument which the affidavit makes. There is no field study to establish that the severity of caste continues in its, I mean, that caste continues
After
in its
conversion.
oppressive severity after conversion in
Right.
Christian and Muslim Dalits. So that is the
Right.
argument which the affidavit makes. Now, this argument can be contested on three grounds. One, what is the job of a commission, right? We realize, I mean, one should recall that since 1931, India has not had a caste census, right? So, if you're really looking for objective, for serious data, one has to
Hmm.
rely on the caste census. Since 1931, there has been no caste census. And till 1931, almost all the colonial census, they noted untouchability within Muslims and Christians, right? And Dr. Ambedkar also, in his book Pakistan or the Partition of India, he also discusses the question of untouchability among Muslims, right,
Interesting.
based
Right.
on the colonial census document. So Dr. Ambedkar he's discussing untouchability among both Muslims and Christians, right?
Hmm.
So in terms of untouchability as a practice, it is clearly documented. But to pose this question to Rangnath Mishra, that you have not conducted any field study to document the severity, persistence of caste severity among Dalit Muslim and Dalit Christians, it's an unfair question. Why? Uh, so what does the commission do? Commissions usually talk to the various state governments. They rely on existing scientific knowledge on an issue. They conduct workshops. They visit various states. They talk to the various stakeholders. And on that count, Rangnath Mishra has done exactly what the earlier Kaka Kalil Commission did when it recommended the inclusion of Dalit Sikhs, and the Gopal Singh panel did when it recommended the inclusion of Dalit Buddhists, right? So there is, in terms of classification, there is no distinction at all from the methodology of Rangnath Mishra, or from the methodology of
Right.
Gopal Singh report, or from the methodology of Kaka Kalika Commission, right? So to ask and demand from Rangnath Mishra any special scientific knowledge, that's an unfair demand. So in terms of what the commissions usually do. So that is one. And second, uh, when we talk about severity. So how did the I mean, there are claims that even severity goes down when one converts to Sikhism, or when one
Mhm.
converts to Buddhism. Was this question posed when the Dalit Buddhists were included, or Dalit Sikhs were included? Why is this question only being posed for Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims? And now, when we come to the sociological part, like I mentioned, there are already various works, and the caste like the Gadhedi, the donkey breeders, caste like Bhangi, scavengers, Halal Khor, Lal Begi, Bhatiara, Gorkhan, Pakho, Nut, it can be clearly traced. It can be clearly traced that their social, economic, and educational backwardness, it is due to their emergence from the untouchable locations to the ex-untouchable locations. It can be
Mhm.
clearly proved, it can be clearly documented. Second, if we look at the SC category, then a number of significant numerically large caste groups, like the Namashudras, like the Mahars, like the Malas, like the Jatavs in Uttar Pradesh. So there is no creamy layer in the SC category, right? And because of the benefit of reservations, a number of these groups, they have also become upwardly mobile. So they have moved from the villages to cities. They have moved higher up in the class ladder. So one needs to ask whether the severity of caste is the same in these communities, in these upwardly mobile communities. So the severity test, it has to be thought through. It has to be thought through properly. And there is empirical evidence that Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christians, uh, they are one of the most marginalized communities in India in terms of their representation. Because I hardly know any person from the Dalit Muslim background who has even entered a state assembly, or even entered the parliament.
Or
And
as
in
an IAS officer and so on, all these
IS
other.
officer,
Right.
yeah. So I have
Right.
traveled across UP and Bihar, and also in other parts of India, and I've talked. For example, I've talked to many those kinds of communities in Karnataka also. So they are, I mean, they are extremely backward, extremely marginalized, and this marginalization comes from their untouchable locations.
I think that's
And
certainly true. I mean, I've reported a lot from West Bengal, where most of the Muslims are from the Pasmanda community.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think
Even the
there is
scavengers, even if you look at
very
the
little. Yeah.
scavengers in Delhi and Bangalore, they largely
Yeah.
come from Bengal, right?
Yeah.
From the Bengal region, and most of them,
Yeah.
I mean, there are number of reported deaths of Muslim scavengers because of toxic gases and so on and so forth, when they clean the sewers
Clean.
and in these
100%.
metropolitan locations.
In fact, recently when communal violence broke out in Gurgaon, very probably the people, I mean, we're not aware of the exact caste location, but probably they were Pasmanda Muslims who were
Yeah,
attacked. So again, I think the idea that their caste and religion kind of both played a role in their marginalization in some ways.
yeah. So again, to sum up,
Hmm.
the severity question, it to be only fair, it should also be asked from the Sikh Dalits
Right.
and the Buddhist Dalits, because there are claims within Buddhism that they have transcended caste, or the severity has come down because of their conversion, and similar claims are shared by the Sikh religious leadership. So again, Muslims and Christian leadership is no exception, right? So again, I think there is a question of classification that we need to keep in mind. Yeah.
Got it. Final question now, Khalid. I want you to, so, in a way, we've been part of this debate for 70 years now. You discussed that Hukum Singh brought it up in the Constituent Assembly and so on and so forth. What I want to ask you is, why are we discussing this now? Two things that I would like you to touch upon in your and of course you can go for anything else. But something that I'm curious about is, one is, has it got anything to do with the BJP's Pasmanda outreach? Second is, usually when you're talking about things like reservations, there is always an entrenched legacy interest that is a big factor, right? I mean, this goes across the board, in fact. So within the Dalit reservation policy ecosystem, is there a pushback towards the extension to other people, even though they might be deserving? Is it something as simple as that? Is that also a factor?
Uh, so, I mean, from 1990s onwards, uh, so I mean, the Christian Dalits were mobilizing for inclusion uh,
Hmm.
for a longer period, but the Dalit Muslims they started picking up this agenda, this issue from at least around the 1985 onwards, right? And in 94 there was Dr. Ejaz Ali, backward All India Backward Muslim Morcha. He he created that organization in
Hmm.
94, and he really raised this issue in the public sphere.
Hmm.
So there is this notion because of from 1980s onwards, uh, the anti-caste movements or the spiral of social justice around the mandal and all. So the caste consciousness, anti-caste consciousness, it was spreading, and it had its influence on Muslims as well, right? Uh, I mean, one could go on given the historical detail, but let us, for the argument's sake, from 1980s onwards, this anti-caste consciousness it also gripped a few Dalit Muslim and Dalit Christian leaders, right? Uh, in 2004, so this has nothing really to do with the BJP government. So if you look at the PIL by the Dalit Christians, they were there in 2004.
Hmm.
Then Muslims they petitioned in 2008, and now there are a number of petitions from the Muslim and Dalit
Right.
Christian Muslim side. So it was already pending in the courts for 2 decades. Uh, and now the Supreme Court last year it decided to adjudicate the issue because it was pending. Uh, and then it asked the government, and the central government, it supported its affidavit. And despite the BJP's Pasmanda outreach, so we should clearly understand historically that there are only two political parties that have opposed this demand. One is BJP, and second is the Shiv Sena. Those are the
Right.
only two political parties they have opposed. So again, there is a contradiction. At the one point, on one
Sorry,
hand,
what have they opposed? They've opposed Pasmanda reservations.
no, not Pasmanda,
Sorry.
because Pasmanda is a much more omnibus category.
Right.
The inclusion of Dalit Muslims and Christians in the SC list.
Right. Got it.
So the two parties, the Shiv Sena and the BJP, they have historically opposed the
Opposed.
inclusion, while
Interesting.
there are many other parties which have supported. For example, the Bahujan Samaj Party, it supported in 2005
Right.
the demand for inclusion of Dalit Muslims and Christians. Even in Bihar, RJD and JDU, they supported. So many states have supported this demand, but these are two political parties that were dead against the inclusion, and their anxiety comes from this notion of convergence, right? Their
Hmm.
anxiety it comes from this notion of convergence, that if reservations are extended to Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christians, maybe the conversion issue is activated. Uh, and again,
In
one
the
needs to
BJP
really,
point of view, conversion is almost a carrot to prevent. Sorry, reservation is almost a carrot to prevent conversions from the BJP's
yeah.
point
So
of view.
that is what I mean. So I mean, we didn't get the chance to really discuss in the sequence.
Hmm.
That is how conversations go. Uh, but that is one of the key point, that the Dalit Muslims and Christians, they also see that this as a right, as a violation of Article 25, which is freedom of conscience, right? So somehow, so there is a very interesting. So when this High Court, when the Supreme Courts or the courts, when they approach the question of conversion
Hmm.
from Islam or Christianity to Hinduism or Sikhism or Buddhism, the court approached those issues as a matter of fact, right? So, for example, in the recent 2016, uh, this judgment, the Muhammad Sadiq versus Darbara Singh Guru
Mm-hmm.
case in
Mm-hmm.
2015, where a Muslim had converted to Sikhism. So Muhammad Sadiq, he was a folk singer. He converted to from Islam to Sikhism, uh, and he also contested for elections from Punjab Assembly in 2012, and he defeated his opponent by a large margin, right?
Right.
So then the opponent, which is Darbara Singh Guru, he went to the court saying that he's a Muslim, his parents were Muslim. How is he contesting from the scheduled caste seat? So eventually, the Supreme Court uh, gave a judgment in favor of Muhammad Sadiq, right, who converted to Sikhism,
Sikhism.
right? And
Right.
Supreme Court says it is settled law that a person can change his religion and faith, but not the caste to which he belongs, as caste has linkage to birth, right? So, in the case of conversion from Islam or Christianity to Hinduism, Sikhism, or
Mm.
Buddhism, so the courts approach these matters as a matter of fact, as a
Right.
question of fact, and they come up with these kinds of
But this doesn't
observations.
hold the other way around.
On the other way around, there is a very interesting doctrine of eclipse, which
Right.
says once you convert from Hinduism or Sikhism or Buddhism to Islam or Christianity, your caste is eclipsed. You lose
Right.
your caste. And the
Right.
moment you reconvert to any of these faiths, you regain your caste. So, there, in the question of the convergence from to Islam and Christianity, the court approached these questions as a matter of law, not as a matter of fact, right? And this doctrine of eclipse, it's a legal sleight of hand. It's a legal sleight of hand, and it's a
Right.
sociological travesty. It's a sociological travesty. And so, in that sense, this
So
notion.
it's almost a concept invented of the courts which has no relevance on the ground at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Mm.
you can see the inconsistency in both the positions, and that is because
Mm.
because they are following closely the Act, the 1950 Act, when dealing with
Right.
questions of the conversions to Islam and Christianity, right? So again, this is inbuilt into the legal understanding. This doctrine of this doctrine of eclipse, and many people's they argue that this is a definitional fiat. It's an ideological move. It's
Mm.
not a sound legal or anthropological reasoning. It's a definitional fiat, and it is basically brought in order to discourage conversions to these faiths. Uh, Now, one could challenge
If
that
I could almost
because
put a little pin in this
yeah,
conversation, Khalid, it almost seems like we're discussing this within a very Savarkarite framework, where there are two types of religions almost. Is that
that is
how you would
also
see it?
which the affidavit says. So one further
Right.
argument for the from the affidavit is
Right.
that the Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims, they it uses the term foreigners,
Right.
right? So there is this distinction between the foreign faiths and the Indic faiths, uh, and it has resonance with the early Orientalist colonial imagination, where this is a Punya Bhumi for certain
Hmm.
faiths. So the Pitra Bhumi and Punya Bhumi, the fatherland and holy land distinction. So that is what is informing this Indic foreign thing as a background understanding. Now that can be challenged on two or three grounds, right? One, if you take the long arc of history, then after the early migration from out of Africa migrants 65,000 years ago,
Hmm.
almost everyone is an immigrant in India. Whether you take the Harappan people, whether you take the Aryan speaking people, later Huns, Scythians, Shakyas, Greeks, the Afghans, the Arabs, the Persians, everyone is an immigrant. So everyone's claims to autochthony is groundless on if you take the long arc of history. If you
Right.
take constitutionally, then constitutionally our constitution does not discriminate a citizen based on the origins of their faiths or even on faiths, right? So the constitution cannot discriminate. It does not discriminate. Even if I'm an atheist, if I'm born an untouchable, I'll get my rights irrespective of my faith, isn't it? So, on both counts, this Indic foreign distinction, it's an ideological intervention. It's not a sound sociological or conceptual intervention, even not a sound constitutional position.
Got it. Thank you so much, Khalid. This is all the time we have. Of course, we could have discussed this for a couple of hours more, but this was a deep, intense, and intellectual discussion that I think our viewers and especially I have benefited from. I've learned so much from this. If you liked what you've heard, if you like the work that Scroll does, I encourage you to become a member and help support us. It's not easy doing this work. It's not easy getting this information out. You can go to scroll.in/contribute. That's all we have for this episode of Scroll Ideas. Thank you so much, Khalid. See you on the other side.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.